Hey, I'm Mehul with DevExpress at TechEd, and I'm here with
Scott Hanselman, how's it going?
Scott. You need no introduction, so we'll skip all the what do you do bits.
I don't know about that, but okay, thank you. I work for the web platform and tools team at Microsoft.
Okay, so, I joke, but you have changed roles a little bit. Can you first talk about that?
So for the first couple of years of working at Microsoft, I've been there now 3.5 years. I worked at MSDN, the developer network, doing kind of community outreach and stuff like that. Now I've narrowed my focus. I work actually for the product team now. So rather than doing content for MSDN, I work actually for ASP.NET. I work with Damian Edwards, Phil Hack, Eric Porter, Steve Sanderson. We're all on one team. And I do community outreach. I do basically, I'm the program manager of miscellaneous for ASP.NET.
Very nice. Okay, so there's not a particular product or feature. It's everything that's all the...
Well, so Phil Hack does MVC and NuGet, and Damian Edwards does JavaScript and web forms, and Steve Sanderson does special projects and scaffolding, and Eric Porter does web pages, and I do all of our coordination of speaking, where we're going to talk, what we're going to talk about, do a lot of the speaking myself. I also run the ASP.NET website, so www.asp.net. The content that goes on there. I do a lot of the tutorials and coordinate those tutorials with our docs teams. And then I also take a lot of community feedback, and I spend most of my time in meetings talking to teams about the next versions of products, making sure that when the community has the need for something, that actually gets baked into the product. So I kind of identify things we're not doing, and I try to drive that into the product itself, like what I'm doing with NuGet.
Right. So speaking of NuGet, let's start with the what is it?
Okay, so NuGet is a .NET library package manager. This is a package manager like GEMS, except it's for software development at kind of pre-compile time. It's design time. It's not a system-wide package manager. It's not something that you would go and say, I want to get SSL support like you would with like apt-get on Linux or RPM. It's only for libraries. So if I have a library and I want a JSON parser, or I want a grid, or I want a new control, I would use NuGet to bring that down from NuGet.org. And it's actually an open source project that's run through the Outer Curve Foundation.
What is this Outer Curve? I'm sorry to sidetrack, but
Okay, so there was a foundation that how we have the Apache Foundation. These are open source non-profit foundations. The Outer Curve Foundation used to be called the Codeplex Foundation. They changed the name because it was confusing people between Codeplex.com and Codeplex.org. Outer Curve is what was formerly Codeplex.org, and it's a foundation that is dedicated to basically helping commercial companies utilize open source, because a lot of people don't use open source because they don't understand the licensing, or the licensing isn't friendly. And it's also a place for Microsoft to encourage people to bring their open source projects over to. So like MVC Contrib and NuGet and a number of other projects are over in that foundation. So NuGet actually isn't owned by Microsoft. The intellectual property is owned by Outer Curve.
That's an interesting thing. I'll come back to it. So let's come back to NuGet. Now, you've been talking about NuGet. Yeah. Why are you so excited about NuGet?
Well, to be clear, I only talk about stuff I'm excited about. I don't necessarily talk about what they tell me to talk about. Why I'm excited about NuGet is because it fits everything together. It's actually bigger than ASP.NET. It happens to be run out of the ASP.NET group, and it ships when you get ASP.NET MVC. But what's exciting about NuGet is it's a real open source project. That means open source, not source opened. People can commit to it. So there's actually external committers that are going and shipping code that's going to end up in Visual Studio. So that's interesting. It's being run out in the open. There's no internal mailing list where we talk about stuff. It's all done in Codeplex. All the bugs and the source live on Codeplex in Mercurial. So that's important. NuGet, while it ships with ASP.NET MVC and is really good for bringing components into your web apps, can also be used for bringing components into your Silverlight apps or your Windows Phone apps. It's got a lot of community attached to it. We've had over 500,000 downloads of the packages. We've got 2,000 packages or more. If you go to stats.nuget.org, you can actually see real time those things being downloaded. And because I think it has the potential to be used by everyone who is using .NET, and it has community attached to it, it's interesting to me.
So it's not just an MVC thing, because that's sort of how it got introduced a little bit, right?
Yes. It came along with MVC 3. So if you get MVC 3 with the tools update, you're going to get a version of NuGet. But you can update NuGet, or you can download it even if you don't have ASP.NET. Just go to nuget.org and click on install. It's a little 600K Visix file, a little Visual Studio extension. It actually works in Visual Studio Express as well, which is really important. It's one of the few extensions that's been allowed to work in Express, which is the free version of Visual Studio. And it'll actually update itself automatically if you get NuGet 1.3. And we're going to be releasing minor versions of NuGet basically every month.
So yesterday you had this mind-blowing talk, and it was just awesome, right? And I don't say it for the reasons you think I say it, because it covered. Why don't you talk about what did it cover?
Well, it was complicated. It was kind of wide sweeping. So we did the basics of NuGet and how to build stuff, but then we started talking about NuGet for the enterprise, because we talk a lot about the public aspects of NuGet, being able to do open source software, both produce and consume. But we also think, and I personally think, and that's why I came up with this kind of initiative, that NuGet is interesting not only for the enterprise customer, for the commercial software vendor. So that's why I came and approached you and our partners at JetBrains, and I even went to talk to the TFS guys internally at Microsoft and said, we need to make it so NuGet works well with commercial software. So we discussed things like licensing and subscriptions and stuff. So I thought it would be interesting if we came up with a way for someone who has a DevExpress subscription to then get that as a private feed, because NuGet has the notion of where a package source is. NuGet.org is the public package source for all stuff, but everything there has to be free. It's a gallery, but it's a gallery of free stuff. Free, open source, non-crippled trialware, but free. But why can't you have one for my subscriptions? So then I approached you guys, and you came up with a really cool solution.
So talk a little bit about that, because, and that's one of the things I really liked about your talk, is you go and talk and show step by step how to have your own NuGet.
Right, so I show basically there's three ways. You can have a folder and put a bunch of NuGet packages in it. It can be a share somewhere. That's the easiest way, but it's very limited. You could make a basic one using the NuGet.server package, and you can have a little website where you drop a NuGet package into a folder called packages, and we'll make a feed. Or you could use Orchard, which is another open source project that's owned by Outer Curve, and create a complete CMS with NuGet package feed. And then you could have people within your enterprise submit and automatically push packages. You can vote on them and have reviews and stuff. And what's cool about that, and what I did in the talk, is I took a continuous integration system, checked in some code, have it come out automatically during a build server, and in the build, not only do I build the product, I also build a NuGet package, and then push the package off to the package server. So that was kind of cool.
So let's back up. What did you like so much about the solution that one of our guys, Azure, made?
Right, so the thing that I liked about the DevExpress solution was that I've had a DevExpress subscription for a number of years now, and I have to log into the subscription center and then download MSIs and install stuff. And sometimes you guys go through these really intense update things, where like every month there's a new version, and then for a number of months there won't be, and then there's a bunch of new versions again. So there's a number of interesting things there. You have suites of products that I can subscribe to, and there's lots of controls within them. Sometimes I don't want them all. There is samples that you put on some parts of the site, and those are kind of so hard to find. And then I want to get updates. Each of those three problems can be solved by NuGet. So what Azure came up with was a way for me to, using my DevExpress credentials, log in and get a private feed URL using OAuth, which is the same thing you use to log into Twitter. So I took that private feed URL and I put that into Visual Studio, and then I can switch my feed from the public feed to my personal feed, and then I can see the DevExpress products that I purchased. But the cool part was, then he said, well, how about DevExpress.mvc? That's fine, but what about DevExpress.mvc.grid.sample? So now I can go and get samples and teach myself how to use DevExpress products by saying, oh, I want the grid sample, or I want the tree sample. Hit install, that package has a dependency on the other, brings it down. Not only do I get the controls, the references added, I get the web config set up for me, and I get a sample on how to use the product. So I think the potential for this for commercial software vendors is huge. And I'm hoping that you guys are leading the way, but we're going to see other folks and other component vendors do the same thing.
Absolutely. Now, being that it's an open source project, right? There's some dedicated Microsoft devs on this project.
Yeah, 2.5. We have 2.5 devs.
Wow. How do you guys take changes or new source in there?
Right, so we've already had a number of what are called pull requests. So we're using a DVCS, a distributed version control system, and with something like SVN or Subversion, you would say, here's a patch, and then the main committer would then apply the patch. With a DVCS, you fork the main, work on your own fork, and then you say, I've made changes over here, I'm going to put in a pull request. Rather than a patch where I hand it to you, I'm going to say, hey, Mehul, over here, I'm requesting that you pull my changes down and integrate them into the main. So I'm basically make a parallel universe, make my changes, and then I submit a request for you to merge the changes. And that's your opportunity to go through and do that. So people in the community can fork the code, build it themselves, make changes, and I would encourage you guys to do that because actually DevExpress had some things that they wanted changed in NuGet that we couldn't get done. We only have 2.5 devs. This is a great opportunity for you or someone else to make those changes, work with us. You may submit a number of pull requests before one is accepted, but once you've done, you do that enough times, you can become a committer. You can actually become a member of the team. As with any open source project, it's a meritocracy. Nice. Do a good job for some small things, then we'll let you try the big stuff.
Excellent. Yeah, because there is some of the integration thing that we've talked about getting into the toolbox, et cetera, et cetera. So before getting that, now let's switch over to your talks in general, right? So you do great presentations. I'm sure you get good feedback. What do? Do you prepare for like 2 weeks in advance or something?
Well, it depends. So the two things that I work on the most are what I call the story arc, and I work on the narrative, and I work on the demos. In this particular one, I had a couple of demo problems, not the NuGet talk, which went pretty well, I thought, but in my last talk, I had some weird stuff with SSL certificates. What I ended up trying to do is I practice as many times as I can to make as many failures happen while I'm practicing. I actually try to force failures. I make mistakes on purpose, so then if it happens on stage, I recognize, oh, that's that thing that failed before. What you don't want is an unknown failure on stage. So I practice that a lot. And then I talk about the story arc. Deciding what order to put stuff in the NuGet talk was a big point of discussion.
Yeah, so it was in a wide range of topics, because you start from here's a problem, here's sort of NuGet, and then several different solutions. And then the ending, Rick's video.
Oh yeah, so one of the things that NuGet can do is use PowerShell. And what we ended up doing was automating Visual Studio. So I can actually use PowerShell, get a hold of Visual Studio. I was changing font sizes with a thing called mood swings. And then with the help of a PowerShell guru named Lee Holmes, he actually took the Rick Astley video, the Rick rolling video, and converted it into ASCII art. So I Rick-rolled everyone from NuGet using PowerShell and Visual Studio at the end of the talk.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Well, Scott, is there anything else that you're super excited about right now?
Right now, my number one priority is getting the community more involved. The discussions that I've been having are I want more people blogging and more people pushing Microsoft to do the right thing. I feel that the blogging and the quality of blogging has gone down in the last 2 or 3 years. Maybe people are tired, maybe people are working on stuff, maybe people have gone to Twitter. But I think that the interesting, kind, and constructive criticism that I kind of enjoyed 3 or 4 years ago in blogging, I feel has kind of gone down. I'd really encourage people to step up their commentary, their discussion about what's Microsoft's doing right, Microsoft's doing wrong, and also help the community more. It's amazing how much people have time to complain about open source, but how little time they have to contribute. Even something as simple as working on documentation is useful in open source.
That's interesting. So are you saying there's more Microsoft love now?
No, I'm saying that I see a lot of people complaining, but they're not offering a lot of solutions.
Right.
And when they complain on Twitter, and they don't realize that Twitter is a venting mechanism, but it doesn't live longer than a couple of weeks. But a well thought out piece of commentary, a column, a newspaper column, if you will, in the form of a blog post, can be so impactful internal to Microsoft. If you write a blog post about something that you don't like versioning, or you don't like the way we're doing something, don't tweet it, don't email Scott Gu, because he's just going to forward it to me. Write a thoughtful blog post, and don't call it like why everyone at Microsoft's a douchebag. Just say, issues with product versioning at Microsoft and my solution. You mean? Kind discourse, I think, is lacking right now, not just in the Microsoft space, but generally.
I think that just goes as a general talk, and whenever you have criticism, offer something like, what would you like to see it as? Right? Complaining's fine, you can say we suck, but how can we be better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want more people to get back to blogging. Blog once a week. I don't think that's much to ask. Pick a couple of emails that you've written this week that are more than 4 paragraphs long, and ask yourself, did that email and those keystrokes work for me effectively? And maybe I could have not written that email, written a blog post instead, and then maybe linked people to it.
Interesting. Okay, so we ought to point them to your blogging tips that you've got. Do you have a tag for that?
No, they just take a look at my blog. I think it's under musings, probably. But I just think people need to conserve their keystrokes, right? Have you ever heard this term? So how fast do you type?
60 words a minute.
Okay, so you type 60 words a minute, you're a certain age, you could go and calculate how many keystrokes are left in your hand before you die.
Oh, wow.
Right? I mean, this is true. You're not going to get any more keystrokes back. So if I email you and I ask you your opinion about what we think Microsoft should do in open source, you could email me back with 6 very well thought out paragraphs, but it would just go to me. That would be a waste of your keystrokes. If you blog about it, you could potentially make those keystrokes multiply, effectively giving more power to the keystrokes. Then you just send me a link to it. Not only am I going to see it, but the rest of the community is going to see it. I can link to it, I can refer to it. I don't have to worry about forwarding it around. And you effectively, are not having to conserve your keystrokes. They're working for you. Think about where you spend your time and who you give the gift of your keystrokes.
I fully agree. Do you feel, though, there are some people blogging for the sake of, well, some context running in here, but there are some people blogging, but not really saying anything interesting, right?
I think that's true sometimes. I mean, blogging is an outlet. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this, and what is my goal? And in all things that you do, right? You have to balance the amount of time you spend producing content and the amount of time you spend consuming content.
So, for myself, I really like you as a blogger. I like Atwood, and one of the things I find is you guys have a certain way of telling a story, right? Whether it's, I installed this router, right? Mm-hmm. For most people, router stories aren't that interesting. I don't know, for some reason, maybe it's the images, maybe it's just the, hey, the background of, I solved this problem with my cabling in my house, right? So, when do you know you have something interesting to tell?
Have you ever done anything at DevExpress where you've actually jumped out of your seat, opened your laptop, and then run down the hall with the laptop open because you want to tell somebody about it?
Yeah.
When that happens, I want to blog about it. Right? That's when when that moment happens, like, dude, have you seen this? That's when it's time to blog.
So when you're excited, and you get excited a lot.
Yeah, a little bit.
But it's technology, so you should, absolutely. Finally, you're a crazy blogger to the point where you were invited to the White House.
Oh, well, that was an interesting thing, though. I speak at a number of blogging conferences, and I was very fortunate to speak at a conference called Blogging While Brown. And it was
Wait a minute.
It's a conference called Blogging While Brown for people of color, and I also attended.
Excellent.
A lot of my people are brown, and everyone I care about is brown, so I went to Blogging While Brown, and the Blogging While Brown people were invited to the White House, not necessarily myself.
Right.
And we met with some of the new media people there and talked to them, and it was pretty cool. And I'll be going again this year.
I saw a little bit of it, especially the opening where you've got the picture with the family, where you're talking about, I'm that guy, and what it's like to be that guy. It's hilarious.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun.
So anything else you want to plug besides the blog?
I'm not a big guy to plug. Well, actually, if I got to plug something, I would plug Rob Connery and my new podcast called This Developer's Life. I would really encourage people to check it out. It's very different. It's unlike any podcast you've listened to, unless you've listened to This American Life, and then it's exactly like that. It's a complete ripoff. It's an homage to This American Life, and they talk about developers, their stories, and what developers think about things.
That's a great podcast. I think it's really. How are the numbers? Is it every month you're getting more and more?
Right now we've got about 500,000 downloads, so we're doing good.
Wow.
Yeah. Check us out and review us on iTunes.
For sure, we'll put up links to that stuff. And Scott, thank you very much.
My pleasure.